Hey guys, James here from James at Productions. 2 weeks ago, a quote from an interview with Spotify CEO Daniel Ek sparked a lot of news coverage in the music industry, and it also sparked lots of debate among musicians. The quote was, "You can't record music every 3 or 4 years and think that's going to be enough." Some people agreed, and many people criticized Spotify for destroying the music industry. I want to share my thoughts on Spotify and music streaming in general in this video and tell you why I'm thankful for Spotify from 3 perspectives: as a musician, an audio engineer, and a music lover. Now, these are just my opinions. Feel free to agree or disagree, but do tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll also link the sources I used in the description. From the perspective of a musician, the biggest complaint about Spotify is that it's not paying musicians enough for their music. But when people complain about that, do they even understand how Spotify's business model works? And have they thought about whether or not Spotify can even afford to pay more? Many people mistakenly assume that Spotify has been making a huge profit because it's such a big platform. Everybody uses it. But they're wrong, because Spotify only started making a profit in 2019, which was 13 years since Spotify first started. In 2019, they made an operating profit of about $107 million. Now, just to put things into perspective, Apple made almost $100 billion in profit the same year. Furthermore, Spotify isn't even the party that pays musicians. I'll link an article in the description that explains how exactly musicians get paid when their music gets streamed on Spotify. But to put it very simply, you cannot expect Spotify to be able to spew out more money for musicians out of thin air. I'm a musician myself since I was 7, and I think Spotify and music streaming in general is hugely beneficial to musicians, especially emerging ones. It is now easier than ever for musicians to release music for the world to hear, and more importantly, your music is so easy to access by anyone now with internet access. If you tell musicians from 30 years ago that their music is accessible within clicks of a computer anywhere in the world, they would be so excited, because the whole point of being a musician is to share your music, your experiences, your feelings, and your voice with others. I feel like some musicians nowadays are so inclined to feel victimized by the system. And instead of focusing on the true purpose of being a musician, they easily buy into the whole arts are underappreciated, musicians are underpaid, we need more appreciation from society narrative. I mean, those things may very well be true, but don't stray away from why you became a musician in the first place. With streaming becoming the norm, you now no longer have to go through a label to release your music. And you don't have to worry about not selling all the copies of the CD you ordered anymore. It requires much less resources to distribute music digitally than physically. And the popularity of music streaming removed a lot of barriers for musicians who are on a lower budget to share their music. Research data also shows that people are now listening to more music from more artists than ever before because of streaming services. As an emerging musician, your music now has a higher chance of being discovered by new listeners thanks to the AI-generated recommendations on streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, not to mention the ability to easily share and promote your music on social media. If a person sees your post about your music and likes it, they can easily add it to their library and listen to it whenever they want. If they had to pay $1 for your song, they might not choose to buy it because they didn't like it enough, or just because they wanted to save it for that upcoming new single from their favorite band. Worse, if they had to buy the whole CD just for that song, it's even less likely for them to buy it. And that's bad for musicians, because you would want new listeners to save a song they kinda like, but unsure if they love it yet. Because, as we all know, sometimes a song just grows on us. To conclude the musician perspective, I think Spotify and music streaming is good because it makes musicians' music incredibly easy to access for anyone. It makes it easier for musicians to share and promote their music, and it gives unknown musicians a greater chance to be discovered. Also, don't forget, music piracy is much less of a problem now than before thanks to streaming services. And I hope everybody agrees that's for the better. Now, I want to talk about Spotify and streaming from an audio engineer's perspective. As an audio engineer who mixes and masters music for a living, I absolutely think that streaming is awesome on so many levels. First of all, I can now hear the works of many more fellow engineers than ever before. While I don't think having a unique mix is nearly as important as having a unique style in terms of songwriting and arrangement, at least for the enjoyment of the listeners. Being able to hear mixes done by engineers from all over the world gives me new ideas for sound, tone, mixing styles, effects, and so on. I'm able to constantly try new things, improve my mixing skills because of that. One of the things that always amuses me after listening to mixes from many audio engineers on Spotify is that big name mix engineers don't always guarantee good mixes. I've heard mixes from a nobody that sound way better than a world famous mix engineer. The second biggest thing I love streaming services for is loudness normalization. Loudness war is bad, period. People try to justify it by saying, oh yeah, metal music calls for it. No, it does not. One of Metallica's best albums, the Black Album, which also happens to have an incredible mix, has a loudness of almost -12 LUFS, which is almost 2 times quieter than a lot of the music nowadays. If your music needs to be squashed to hell and back in order to sound heavy, yeah, I think that's on the songwriting or the mix, or a combination of both, not the loudness. Spotify and Apple Music have optional loudness normalization, which I enabled on day one because I compile my own playlists and I don't want one song to sound louder or quieter than the other. YouTube normalizes all the audio by default and you don't have a choice to turn it off, which I think is what the rest of the streaming services need to do. Not only will it give the majority of listeners a better listening experience, but it'll also put the final nail in the coffin for the loudness war, and music will finally be more dynamic, less fatiguing, and less distorted. Lastly, music streaming simply allows the songs you have mixed and or mastered to be heard by many more people than ever before, without needing the song to be constantly played on the radio stations. To me, the whole point of audio engineering in the music industry is to make shit sound good for the listeners. It's kind of pointless if your mix is legendary, but no one listens to it. The final perspective I would take is from that of someone who simply loves music. Spotify completely changed how I listen to and discover music for the better. Before I got Spotify, I got most of my music from downloading them, for free. And I discovered music through browsing the catalogs of websites and recommendations from friends. I ended up never liking most of the albums I downloaded, and a lot of times I only liked 1 or 2 songs on an album. I know there's music for streaming on YouTube, but the quality is not the best, and it honestly isn't a good platform for music listening in my opinion. At the end of the day, I was mostly just listening to the same few albums or songs from the same few bands, and I always struggled to discover new bands whose music that would actually click with me. And I know I wasn't the only one who had this struggle. Spotify changed that kind of style of listening to music and discovering new music. It allows people to enjoy music from an artist without having to commit to buying the entire album. I may seem young, but I grew up listening to CDs and listening to music on CD players. I can't tell you how many times I didn't buy a CD because I only liked a couple of songs on it, or gave up listening to my favorite song from an album just because I didn't like the rest of the song on that album. Spotify and Apple Music have millions of songs, and they will recommend you new songs based on your taste. This feature alone allowed me to discover 15 to 20 new songs that I didn't know before every year, and that really broadened my musical horizon. You can also now discover playlists curated by others and discover more new music that way. There are just so many amazing perks for listeners that I think music streaming is probably the best thing that consumers can ask for. Of course, with new technology and changes, there are always downsides. But since this video is me making a positive case for Spotify, I will mention some of the biggest downsides without expanding on them. The first one and the biggest one is obviously the decrease in revenue for musicians. But data shows that it has been steadily increasing for a few years now. Another big one for me as an audio engineer is the lack of credits. Back in the day, credits would be written on the booklet inside the CD case. So you could always check who produced it, who wrote what, who mixed it, and who mastered it. Now, you can barely find any credit information on Spotify. The show credits barely shows you anything. Most of the time, it just shows the band members. On rare occasions, it would show the producer, but that would be it. I definitely feel like professionals in the music industry should advocate for better crediting online as much as they do for higher pay from streaming. So here are my closing thoughts. As many musicians are complaining about not getting paid enough, I think they may be forgetting whom we are working for in the end as professionals in the music industry. It's the listeners. If there were no listeners, there would be no musicians, no labels, or audio engineers. To put it bluntly, we are really just part of a supply chain that creates our products, which are our music, for our consumers. So in general, it shouldn't be a bad thing when there is a platform like Spotify that makes this supply chain more efficient, that enables us to create many more products of many more variety, and that allows much easier, more affordable access to the end products. I think streaming services become more like a platform for musicians to pitch their music, a platform where they can attract fans to go to their shows, follow them on social media, buy their merchandise, and so on. Those are where the main income sources can be. The bottom line is, streaming will only become more and more popular, and as making music becomes more affordable with the rise of home studios, music will also become more affordable. The best we can do as professionals in the music industry is to adapt quickly and expand and better develop our income sources. Because if we don't do that and just complain, we'll eventually be left behind by those who do. That's it for this video. Those are just my opinions, which you don't need to agree with, but let me know how you feel about music streaming in the comment section. I love hearing opinions from all angles. Now get back to your doll and make some music, and see you next time.